I counted every interruption because by the fourth one, I knew Karen Whitmore was not confused. By the seventh, I knew she was not nervous. By the 11th, I knew she was trying to bury something. And by the 17th interruption, when her voice finally cracked and the entire courtroom turned toward the evidence screen, I understood the truth had been sitting in front of us the whole time. She thought if she kept talking, no one would hear the silence between her lies. But courtrooms have a strange way of listening. And that day, the ending ding shocked everyone. Before we go any further, make sure you have subscribed to this channel for more powerful courtroom stories like this one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Also, comment below and tell us where you are watching this video from. Now, let me take you back to where this case truly began. The case looked simple when it landed on my bench. A woman named Emily Parker was suing Karen Whitmore for unpaid caregiving wages, damaged personal property, and reimbursement for emergency expenses. Karen claimed Emily had abandoned her job, neglected an elderly man, and taken advantage of a vulnerable household. That was the paperwork. But paperwork can be cold. It can tell you the claim amount, the dates, the names, the receipts. What it cannot tell you is how long a person cried before finally filing the case. It cannot tell you how many messages they sent before realizing no answer was coming. It cannot tell you what it feels like to be accused of cruelty by the same person who refused to pay you for compassion. Emily Parker entered first. She was 36 years old, wearing a simple blue dress and holding a thick folder against her chest. Her face was tired, but not careless. There is a difference. She looked like someone who had been carrying responsibility for so long that even standing still took effort. I noticed her shoes first, not because they were fancy, because they were not. The soles were worn down. The left heel had a small crack near the edge. People often dress carefully for court, but shoes tell the truth about the life outside it. Emily's shoes told me she worked on her feet. Long hours, little rest, no room for vanity. Then Karen Whitmore entered. Karen was 51, sharp-eyed, dressed in a cream blazer with gold buttons and a pearl necklace that she touched every few seconds, as if reminding everyone she belonged to a higher class of problems. She carried one slim folder, walked fast, and sat down before the bailiff finished calling the case. I have seen that kind of confidence many times. Sometimes it comes from innocence. More often, it comes from believing the other person cannot afford to fight. When I asked both parties to state their names, Emily said, Emily Parker. Karen leaned toward the microphone and said, Karen Whitmore, daughter and legal manager of the Whitmore household. That phrase caught my attention. Legal manager, not guardian, not power of attorney, not executor, legal manager. People who invent titles often do it because the real title does not give them enough control. I asked Karen, are you an attorney? She blinked. No. Then state your name, not your invented position. The gallery went quiet. Karen smiled, but the smile was tight. That was the first small crack. I turned to Emily. Ems Parker, tell me why you are here. Emily took a breath. Her hands tightened around the folder, and for a moment I thought she might cry before getting one sentence out. But she steadied herself. She said she had worked for Karen's father, Harold Whitmore, for almost 8 months. Harold was 79, recovering from a stroke, and needed help with meals, medication reminders, mobility, laundry, and basic household care. Emily was hired for 5 days a week, but within a month, Karen began asking for weekends, late nights, and emergency coverage. Karen interrupted before Emily finished the sentence. She was not a nurse. That was interruption number 1. I looked at Karen. Ems Whitmore, you will speak when asked. Karen lifted her hand slightly. I'm just clarifying. No, you are interrupting. Her face flushed. Emily looked down immediately. That reaction mattered. She did not look annoyed. She looked conditioned. Like Karen's voice still had power even inside my courtroom, I asked Emily to continue. She said she was not a nurse and had never claimed to be one. She was a certified home care aide. Her agreement with Karen was clear: $20 an hour, payment every Friday, extra hours approved by text. Emily brought the agreement, printed messages, time logs, pharmacy receipts, and photographs of damaged property. Karen interrupted again. Those logs are fake. Interruption number 2. The bailiff shifted his weight. I said, Miss Whitmore, if you call evidence fake before I have even seen it, you are not helping yourself. Karen pressed her lips together. Emily continued. She explained that the caregiving job was supposed to help stabilize her life. Her husband, Mark, had died in a highway accident 2 years earlier. Since then, Emily had been raising her 11-year-old daughter, Sophie, alone. Sophie had asthma, and Emily's schedule had to balance doctor visits, school pickups, rent, and work that did not always respect her exhaustion. When Emily said her daughter's name, her voice softened. That told me Sophie was not background. Sophie was the reason Emily kept showing up. She said Harold became attached to Sophie too, on days when Emily's sitter canceled. Karen allowed Emily to bring Sophie to the house for the final hour of the shift. Harold would help Sophie with crossword puzzles and tell stories about his late wife, Margaret. Emily said he was lonely, gentle, and embarrassed by how much help he needed. Karen laughed under her breath. Interruption number 3, though it had no words. I looked at her. Do not laugh while she describes caring for your father. Karen's smile vanished. Emily said Harold often apologized for Karen's behavior. He would say, my daughter talks like a door slamming. At first, Emily thought he was joking. Later, she realized he was warning her. That line made Karen sit forward. My father had cognitive issues. Interruption number 4. I asked, was he legally incompetent? Karen hesitated. No. But then do not use his medical condition as a shield before I ask about it. Karen's jaw tightened. There are moments early in a hearing when the truth has not appeared yet, but its shadow begins to move. This was one of those moments. Karen did not want Harold described as gentle. She did not want him described as lonely. She did not want him sounding aware, because an aware man can become a witness. Emily opened her folder and handed over the work agreement. The document was plain, signed by Karen and Emily. The terms were clear. I read them carefully. Then I reviewed the text messages. Karen, can you stay until 10 tonight? Dad is anxious. Karen, come Sunday morning. I'll add the hours. Karen, please pick up his medication. I'll reimburse you. Karen, you're the only one he listens to. That last message mattered. I looked at Karen. You wrote that? Karen's eyes flicked to the page. It was an expression. An expression of what? Convenience. Emily looked hurt, not surprised, hurt. I asked how much she was owed. Emily said Karen had stopped paying full amounts after the 4th month. First 1 week late, then 2 weeks, then partial payments. Eventually, Karen owed $3,800 in wages and reimbursements. Emily said she kept working because Harold begged her not to leave, and because Karen kept promising payment. Karen interrupted. She kept working because she wanted access to my father. Interruption number 5. The courtroom shifted. That accusation was heavier than a wage dispute. I asked, access for what? Karen lifted her chin. My father had valuables. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I watched her carefully. Not every tear is truth, but some tears arrive before strategy has time to stage them. Emily looked wounded in a way that told me Karen had used this accusation before. I asked Karen what Emily allegedly took. Karen said, a gold pocket watch. Did you file a police report? Karen paused. No. Did you report it missing before Emily asked for wages? Another pause. No. Did you mention it in any text before this lawsuit? Karen's face hardened. I was trying to handle things privately. That phrase often means something very different in court. Privately can mean respectfully, or it can mean without witnesses. Emily handed over another page. It was a text from her to Karen. Please don't accuse me of stealing because I asked it to be paid. Harold knows I never touched that watch. Karen replied, Harold says what people tell him to say. I read it twice. Then I looked at Karen. Your father was reliable when you needed care for him, but unreliable when he defended the caregiver. Karen said nothing. The sixth interruption was waiting behind her teeth, but for once she swallowed it. Emily then explained the damaged property. Her phone had been knocked from her hand during an argument with Karen in Harold's kitchen. Emily said Karen grabbed her wrist when she tried to record a conversation about unpaid wages. The phone fell, the screen shattered, and Karen told her, "Good, now maybe you'll listen instead of document." Karen interrupted, "That is a lie." Interruption number 6. I leaned forward. "Ms. Whitmore, you have now interrupted 6 times." She looked offended. "You're counting?" "Yes." The gallery went silent. "And I will continue counting." That was the first time Karen looked uncertain, not afraid yet, just uncertain. Emily reached into her folder again, but this time she hesitated. Her thumb rested against a smaller envelope tucked behind the receipts. I saw it. Karen saw it too. Karen's eyes moved to the envelope, then back to Emily. That movement told me the envelope mattered. I asked Emily, "What is in the smaller envelope?" Emily swallowed. "Something Harold gave me." Karen shot up from her chair. "No, interruption number 7. The bailiff stepped forward." Karen pointed at Emily. "She has no right to bring my father into this." Interruption number 8. I said, "Sit down." Karen stayed standing. "My father is not here to defend himself." Interruption number 9. Emily whispered, "He wanted you to hear it." Karen's face went pale. That was the first real fear I saw. Not anger, fear. I looked at Emily. "What did Harold give you?" Emily's hand trembled as she touched the envelope. "A letter," she said, "and a key." Karen whispered, "Don't," and that one word told me more than all 9 interruptions before it. Because Karen Whitmore had not been interrupting to correct the story. She had been interrupting to keep us from reaching the envelope. I asked the bailiff to bring the envelope to my bench. Emily Parker held it for 1 extra second before letting go, and I understood why. Some evidence is heavy because of what it proves. Some evidence is heavy because of who trusted you with it. This envelope was both. Karen Whitmore watched it cross the courtroom with the same expression I have seen on people watching a locked door open from the wrong side. Her lips pressed together. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. She did not look like a daughter worried about her father's privacy. She looked like a woman watching control leave her hands. The envelope was old-fashioned, pale yellow, with shaky handwriting across the front. For the judge, if Karen blames Emily. I looked at Karen. She was staring at the words, not surprised by them, afraid of them. That distinction mattered. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded letter, a small brass key taped to an index card, and a photograph of an elderly man sitting beside a little girl at a kitchen table. The man was Harold Whitmore. The girl, I later learned, was Emily's daughter, Sophie. In the photograph, Harold was smiling, not the polite smile people give for cameras. A real smile. Sophie was leaning over a crossword puzzle, holding a pencil too large for her hand, and Harold was pointing at one of the squares as if giving her a clue. It was a quiet picture, ordinary, but there was warmth in it, and warmth can be powerful evidence when one side has spent the morning describing a home as if it were only property, schedules, valuables, and control. Karen saw the photograph and immediately said, "That was inappropriate." Interruption number 10. The bailiff moved. I lifted one hand. "Ms. Whitmore, you are now at 10. She looked at me as if counting her interruptions was somehow unfair. I continued, Do you want me to reach 17 before lunch? The courtroom went still. Karen sat back, embarrassed and angry. Emily looked down, but I saw the smallest breath leave her body. Not relief exactly. More like someone realizing the person who had talked over her for months was finally being measured. I unfolded Harold's letter. The handwriting was uneven. Some letters leaned too far right. Some words shook on the page. But the meaning was clear. Your Honor, my daughter Karen will say, Emily took my watch. She did not. I gave it to her to keep safe after Karen tried to sell it. The watch belonged to my father. Karen does not know where it is because I hid it before she could take it. The courtroom changed. You could feel it. Emily closed her eyes. Karen whispered. He was confused. That was not counted as an interruption because I had not asked a question and she barely spoke it. But I heard it. I always hear the words people hope will float quietly under the record. I kept reading. Emily has cared for me when my own daughter was busy telling people how difficult I am. She brought me soup when I could not swallow well. She wrote down my medicine when Karen forgot. Her little girl Sophie made me laugh for the first time after Margaret died. If Karen says Emily stole from me, ask Karen why she wanted the watch appraised. I looked up. Karen was pale now, not fully broken, but pale. The letter continued. I am not a fool. I had a stroke, but I know when I am being handled. I know when my checkbook is missing. I know when my phone is moved. I know when Karen tells visitors, I am sleeping, so they will leave. I know Emily is owed money. I asked Karen 3 times. She told me help should be grateful. I stopped reading for a moment. Help should be grateful. The phrase matched Karen too perfectly to ignore. There are certain sentences that carry fingerprints. Not physical fingerprints, but emotional ones. The arrogance, the structure, the contempt. Harold's letter sounded like a man repeating something he had heard and could not forget. Emily was crying now silently. I asked, Miss Parker, when did Harold give you this? She took a breath. 3 weeks before I was fired. Where? In the kitchen. Karen had gone to a salon appointment. Harold asked me to get a box from the hallway closet. Inside was the envelope. Karen interrupted. She had no business in that closet. Interruption number 11. I turned toward her. You are proving the letter's concern better than the letter does. Karen's mouth snapped shut. Emily continued. She said Harold had become increasingly worried during the final month she worked there. He could not always move easily, and his speech became tired in the evenings. But his mind was sharper than Karen wanted people to believe. He noticed when mail disappeared. He noticed when Karen delayed payments to the pharmacy. He noticed when his old friends stopped visiting because Karen told them he was too weak. I asked Emily if she believed Harold was being neglected. She hesitated. That hesitation mattered because it showed restraint. Someone trying to exaggerate would have seized the word immediately. Emily said, I don't know if neglect is the legal word, but he was lonely, and he was scared to upset her. Karen laughed once. Interruption number 12. It was not a loud laugh, but it was cruel. Emily looked down. That reaction made me understand something. Karen's interruptions were not only for me. They were aimed at Emily's body, her confidence, her ability to keep speaking. Karen had learned that if she cut Emily off fast enough, Emily would shrink before finishing the truth. Not in my courtroom. I said, Miss Whitmore, the next interruption will have consequences. Karen's eyes flashed, but she stayed silent for the moment. I turned back to Emily. Tell me about your daughter. Emily looked surprised by the question. Then her face softened with a sadness that was almost harder to watch than tears. She said Sophie was 11, bright, stubborn, and embarrassed by her inhaler. After Mark died, Sophie stopped sleeping through the night. Loud sounds frightened her. Sirens made her cry because the accident that killed her father involved emergency vehicles. Emily said she took the caregiving job because it let her work afternoons and evenings while still getting Sophie to school, doctor appointments, and therapy. Then she said something that stayed with me. Harold made Sophie feel like we were not just surviving. The courtroom became very quiet. Emily said Harold remembered old crossword clues, old songs, old baseball players. Sophie would sit at the kitchen table with him while Emily prepared his dinner, and for a few minutes the house felt peaceful. Harold would ask Sophie about school, and Sophie would ask Harold about Margaret, his late wife. They became, in Emily's words, two lonely people who didn't make each other feel lonely. Karen looked disgusted. I saw it, but she did not speak. That silence took effort, and everyone knew it. I asked about the brass key. Emily said Harold told her it opened a small lockbox in his bedroom closet. He said if Karen accused Emily of stealing the watch, the key would prove he had hidden it himself. Emily said she never used the key. She never opened the box. She kept the envelope sealed because Harold told her not to open it unless Karen attacked her reputation. I asked Karen if there was a lockbox. Karen said, my father had many things. Is there a lockbox? She looked away. Yes. Where is it? At the house. Have you opened it? No. Her answer came too quickly. I asked again. Have you opened it? Karen leaned forward, struggling to keep her voice controlled. I said no, but I watched her eyes. Eyes do not prove everything, but they often point where the next question should go. I asked, then how did you know the watch was missing? She froze. Emily looked up. The gallery went silent. Karen's lips parted. No answer. I repeated, if you never opened the lockbox, and Harold says he hid the watch, how did you know the watch was missing? Karen swallowed. He used to keep it in his dresser. When did you check? I don't remember. Before or after Emily asked for her wages? No answer. The courtroom did not need me to explain the problem. Everyone felt it. Karen had accused Emily of stealing a watch she could not prove was missing from the place Harold said he put it. And now, the key sitting on my bench suggested the watch might have been exactly where Harold wanted it. I asked Emily if she had any proof Karen wanted the watch appraised. She nodded and handed over a printed email. It was from an estate jewelry buyer named Porter & Lane Appraisals to Karen Whitmore. The subject line read, Gold Pocket Watch Estimate. The date was 6 weeks before Emily was fired. The email said, based on photographs provided, the watch may have resale value depending on condition and provenance. Physical inspection required. I looked at Karen. Her face went still. What photographs? I asked. Karen said, I was helping my father understand his assets. Did Harold ask for that? He didn't always understand finances. That is not what I asked. She looked at the table. No. There it was. A daughter appraising her father's property without his request, then later accusing the caregiver of stealing the same item after wages were demanded. The shape of the case was becoming clearer and uglier. Emily then explained why she continued working even after Karen stopped paying regularly. Harold begged her not to leave. He said Karen got angry when new people came into the house. Emily needed the money, yes, but she also worried what would happen to Harold if she left suddenly. Every week, Karen promised payment. Every week, Emily believed one more promise because rent was due, Sophie's inhalers cost money, and Caleb-like burdens do not disappear just because an employer delays a transfer. I asked Emily if Sophie knew about the unpaid wages. Emily's voice broke. She knew something was wrong. I tried to hide it, but children know when the refrigerator gets emptier. That sentence landed in the room with painful simplicity. Children know when the refrigerator gets emptier. Karen stared straight ahead, agony, no reaction. And again, that absence said more than a speech would have. Emily said Sophie started saving cafeteria snacks in her backpack because she thought they might need food later. One night, Emily found her daughter wrapping a half-eaten granola bar in tissue. When she asked why, Sophie said, "Just in case the job lady doesn't pay you again." The gallery shifted. Even Karen blinked at that. Not with guilt, with annoyance. I looked at Karen and asked, "Did you know Miss Parker had a child depending on those wages?" Karen said, "Everyone has problems." The words were quiet, but they were sharp. I said, "Yes. And decent people do not use wages as a weapon because someone else's problems are inconvenient." Karen's face flushed. For a moment, I thought she would interrupt again. But she only pressed her mouth shut. Emily then brought out pharmacy receipts. She had purchased Harold's medication twice when Karen's card was declined at the pharmacy. Karen promised reimbursement by text. Karen, "Pick it up and I'll pay you tonight." Karen, "Don't make Dad anxious about money." Karen, "I'll add it to your hours." No reimbursement followed. I asked Karen why. She said, "I dispute the amounts." Then why did you ask her to pay? I was busy. You were busy, so a widow raising a child paid for your father's medication? Karen's eyes hardened. She made herself indispensable. That was almost a confession. Not legally, psychologically, Karen resented Emily because Emily had become necessary in a house Karen wanted to control. Harold trusted her. Sophie brightened the kitchen. The medication was remembered. The hours were logged. The watch was protected. The truth had a witness. Karen could not tolerate that. I asked if Harold was available to testify. Emily looked down. Karen's face changed, and in that moment I knew something had happened to him. Emily said quietly, "He passed away 11 days ago." The courtroom went still. I looked at Karen. She did not cry. She did not lower her head. She touched her pearl necklace slowly, once, twice. Then she said, which makes this entire letter suspicious. Interruption number 13, the bailiff stepped forward. I held up my hand. Not yet, because Karen had just revealed the next layer. Harold was dead. Emily was owed money. The watch was missing, or claimed to be. The daughter had appraised it. The caregiver had a letter and a key, and now Karen wanted the court to treat the dead man's warning as suspicious simply because he could no longer speak for himself. But the dead do sometimes speak in court. Through letters, through receipts, through emails, through keys, and sometimes through people who were brave enough to keep what they were trusted with. I asked Emily if Harold had left anything else. She hesitated again. Karen's eyes snapped toward her. Emily reached into her folder and removed a small memory card sealed in a plastic sleeve. Karen stood so abruptly that the bailiff moved before she said a word. This time, she caught herself. She sat back down, but her face told the whole room what her mouth no longer dared to say. Emily looked at me and whispered, "Harold asked me to save this from the camera in his room." I looked at the memory card, then at Karen, and I understood that part of the truth had been handwritten. But the next part might be recorded. The memory card sat on my bench like a small black secret. I have learned that people react to evidence before evidence speaks. Receipts make some people annoyed. Text messages make them defensive. Photographs make them careful. But recordings, especially recordings they did not know survived, create a different kind of fear. Karen Whitmore had that fear now. She tried to hide it behind outrage, but outrage is often fear wearing a louder coat. I asked Emily where the memory card came from. Emily kept her eyes on me, not Karen. That told me she was trying very hard not to be pulled back into the same old pattern. Karen's voice had controlled too many rooms. Emily was fighting to let my courtroom be different. She said Harold had a small camera in his bedroom. Karen immediately said, "For medical safety." Interruption number 14. I looked at her. "Ems Whitmore, I know how to ask a question." She sat back, but her face was burning. Emily continued. The camera had been installed after Harold's stroke because he once fell beside his bed and could not reach the phone. It was aimed toward the doorway and the sitting chair, not toward the bed itself. Harold knew it was there. Karen knew it was there. Emily knew it was there. The purpose, at least at first, was safety. But according to Emily, during Harold's final month, he became afraid Karen would delete footage. I asked why. Emily's voice dropped. Because he said she was coming into his room at night looking for the lockbox. Karen stood halfway up. That is disgusting. Interruption number 15, the bailiff moved. I said, "Sit down." Karen sat, but her hands were shaking now. I asked Emily if she ever saw Karen search the room. Emily said not directly, but twice she arrived in the morning and found Harold upset. Drawers were open. His dresser items were moved. The small rug near the closet was folded back. Harold told Emily that Karen had been asking about the watch, bank papers, and something he called Margaret's envelope. That name changed the air around the case. Margaret, Harold's late wife. I looked at Karen. For the first time, she looked away before I asked anything. I asked Emily, what was Margaret's envelope? Emily shook her head. I don't know. Harold wouldn't explain. He just said Karen couldn't have it. I asked Karen, what is Margaret's envelope? Karen lifted her chin. My mother left personal papers. They are family matters. Did Harold possess them? He was confused about many things. That is not an answer. Karen's mouth tightened. Yes. Did you look for them in his room? No. The answer came too fast, and in a courtroom, speed can be just as revealing as hesitation. The liar who hesitates is building a bridge. The liar who answers too quickly is trying to slam a door. Emily said Harold asked her to remove the memory card from the camera only after Karen threatened to fire her and accuse her of theft. He told Emily, if she says I don't know what I'm saying, let them see me say it. That sentence stayed with me. Let them see me say it. Harold Whitmore had understood exactly what Karen would do after he was gone. She would call him confused. She would call Emily manipulative. She would call concern interference. She would call truth a misunderstanding. So he tried to leave something behind that could not be rewritten by his daughter's interruptions. I asked whether Emily watched the footage. She said only one clip. Her voice shook when she said it. I asked why only one. Because it felt private, she said. And because I was scared of what else might be on there. That answer gave her credibility. Someone trying to weaponize private footage usually watches everything, cuts it, selects it, frames it. Emily had not done that. She had preserved it. There is a difference. I asked the bailiff to prepare the card. Karen leaned forward. Your Honor, my father is dead. This is exploitation. Interruption number 16. I looked at her for a long moment. No, Miss Whitmore. If your father left evidence because he feared what you would do after his death, the exploitation may have happened before today. The courtroom went completely still. Karen's eyes filled with tears, but again, they did not look like grief. They looked like fury trapped behind embarrassment. The screen flickered on. At first, the image was dim. A bedroom in soft evening light. An older man sat in a cushioned chair beside a small table. Harold Whitmore looked thinner than the photograph, his shoulders slightly bent, one hand resting on a blanket across his lap, but his eyes were alert. That mattered. The timestamp showed 6 weeks before his death. Emily appeared briefly in the doorway carrying a tray. She placed soup on the table and adjusted a pillow behind Harold's back. Sophie followed her, holding a school workbook and an inhaler case. Harold smiled when he saw the child. The room in the courtroom softened, even through grainy footage. Kindness has a shape. Harold tapped the crossword book on the table. Sophie laughed silently, then sat on a small chair beside him. Emily checked the medication organizer and wrote something in a notebook. Nothing about that footage looked like neglect. Nothing looked like manipulation. It looked like care. Karen watched with a tight expression, as if the tenderness itself offended her. The clip jumped forward. Now Emily was gone. Sophie was gone. Harold sat alone, looking toward the doorway. Karen entered. The courtroom felt it immediately. Her body language on the screen was different from Emily's. Emily entered like someone stepping into another person's space. Karen entered like the space owed her an explanation. She stood over Harold's chair and said, "Where is it?" The audio was faint, but clear enough. Harold looked up. "What? The watch?" Harold's voice was weak, but not confused. "I told you. It is safe," Karen said. "Safe from who?" Harold answered. "From you." A silence moved through my courtroom. Karen at the defense table whispered, "He didn't mean that." It was not counted anymore, not because I had stopped counting, because the recording had begun doing the counting for me. On the screen, Karen leaned closer to her father. "You are letting that woman turn you against me," Harold said. "Emily feeds me. Emily listens. Emily remembers the pills." Karen snapped, "Emily is paid help." Harold looked at her for a long moment. "Then pay her." Emily at the plaintiff's table broke down. She covered her mouth with both hands, trying not to make a sound. That was not just evidence of wages owed. It was evidence that Harold had known. He had seen the unpaid work. He had understood the unfairness. And before he died, he had tried to say it clearly. Karen's face hardened on the screen. "You don't understand money anymore," Harold answered. "I understand debt." That sentence landed like a gavel. I paused the footage. I asked Karen, "Did you hear your father ask you to pay her?" Karen stared at the screen. "Did you hear him?" She whispered, "Yes." "Did you pay her?" Karen did not answer. Emily wiped her face and reached for a tissue. Her hands were shaking, but something had changed in her posture. Harold's voice had entered the courtroom. She was no longer carrying his truth alone. I resumed the clip. Karen moved toward the closet. Harold said, "Leave it." Karen ignored him. He tried to stand, but his body betrayed him. He gripped the arm of the chair, frustrated, humiliated by his own weakness. That moment hurt to watch, not because he fell. He did not. Because you could see a man who had once had authority in his own home, realizing his body could not enforce what his mind still understood. Karen opened the closet door, Harold said. Margaret wanted Sophie to have it. Karen froze. So did I. So did Emily Sophie, Emily's daughter. Karen turned slowly. "What did you say?" Harold looked toward the camera, then back at Karen. "Margaret's envelope. It is for the little girl." Karen's face on the screen changed into something cold. "Absolutely not," Harold said. "Your mother wrote it. My mother never met that child." She knew loneliness. She would have liked her. Karen laughed once, cruel and sharp. "You are giving family property to strangers now." Harold's voice grew firmer to people who showed up. The courtroom was silent. I looked at Emily. She seemed stunned, as if she had never heard this part before. Karen had. Her face told me she had. The clip continued. Karen stepped closer to Harold. "You listen to me. If that caregiver gets one more idea that she belongs in this family, I will make sure she leaves with nothing." Harold said, "You already gave her nothing." Karen replied, "Then she should be used to it." That sentence hit Emily like a physical blow. I stopped the video again. For a moment, I did not speak. Not because I did not know what to ask, but because I wanted the courtroom to sit with what had just been said. Then Karen made her 17th interruption. She stood up, pointed at the screen, and shouted, "Turn it off before he says something that isn't true." The room froze. Even the bailiff stopped for half a second, because Karen had not said the video was fake. She had not said the voice was not Harold's. She had not said the footage was edited. She had said, "Before he says something that isn't true," as if she already knew there was more, as if she already knew what her father was about to reveal. I looked at Karen and said, Ms. Whitmore, you just told this court you know the next part of that recording." Her face went completely pale. That was the moment every person in the courtroom understood that the ending of this case was not hiding in Emily's folder. It was hiding in Harold's bedroom, in a recording Karen never thought would survive. I did not restart the recording immediately. I looked at Karen Whitmore first. Her hand was still raised toward the screen, her face drained of color, her mouth half open as if the sentence had escaped before she could catch it. Turn it off before he says something that isn't true. That was not an objection. That was fear speaking in its natural voice. I told the bailiff to stand beside her table. Not behind her, beside her. Close enough that Karen understood the courtroom was no longer going to be managed by her interruptions. Then I said, "Mrs. Whitmore, you have interrupted this proceeding 17 times. The 18th will remove you from this courtroom." She lowered her hand slowly. For the first time all day, Karen Whitmore sat completely still. And that silence was almost as disturbing as her interruptions had been, because silence from a controlling person is never empty. It is strategy changing shape. I turned back to the screen and resumed the footage. Harold Whitmore sat in his bedroom chair, looking smaller than he probably felt inside. Karen stood over him near the closet, one hand on the door frame, the other clenched at her side. On the recording, her face carried the same expression I had seen at the defense table, entitlement wounded by resistance. Harold's voice came through weakly, but clearly. "Margaret knew you would do this." Karen laughed. "My mother knew nothing. She died before any of this nonsense started." Harold looked at her for a long moment. "No, she knew you." That sentence landed softly, but it cut deeply. Karen on the screen stepped closer. "You are going to regret talking like this." Harold did not move. His body was weak, but his eyes were awake. "I regret not stopping you sooner." Emily closed her eyes at the plaintiff's table. She looked like she was listening not just for herself, but for a man who had no one else left in the room. The recording continued. Karen said, "Where is the envelope?" Harold answered, "Safe." "With the watch?" Harold did not answer. Karen's voice sharpened. "Where is the key?" At my bench, I looked down at the small brass key taped to the index card. There it was, the key Karen had been looking for. Emily had not stolen access from Harold. Harold had taken access away from Karen. Karen, on the recording, walked toward the dresser and began opening drawers, one by one, not carefully, not like a daughter helping an elderly father find something. Like someone searching before time ran out, Harold said, "Leave it alone." Karen ignored him. He tried to push himself up again, and that attempt pained me more than I expected. His hand trembled against the chair arm. His legs did not obey fast enough, and Karen never once turned to help him. That, too, was evidence. People think evidence must always be words. Sometimes evidence is what a person does not do when someone vulnerable is struggling 3 feet away. Karen opened another drawer. Harold said, "Emily will know what to do." Karen turned around so quickly the camera caught only part of her face. "Emily is nothing," Harold answered. Emily showed up. Karen said, "For money." Harold replied, "Then pay her." Again, that sentence. Then Harold looked toward the camera. He knew exactly where it was. He knew exactly what might be watching after he was gone. "Emily Parker did not steal from me," he said. "She did not take my watch. She did not ask for Margaret's envelope. She did not know what Margaret wrote." Emily's head lifted. She looked stunned. That told me she truly did not know. Karen knew. Her face at the defense table had become rigid, almost mask-like. On the screen, Harold continued, "If anyone says she stole, they are lying. If Karen says I was confused, she is lying. I know my daughter. I know what she wants. She wants the watch because her grandfather gave it to me. She wants the envelope because Margaret left something she cannot control." Karen's voice cut in on the recording. "Stop." Harold said no. It was one word. But in that bedroom, from that chair, from that failing body, it sounded like the last strength of a man who had been handled dismissed and managed for too long. Then the bedroom doorbell rang faintly in the distance. Karen looked toward the hallway. The clip ended. The screen went black. Nobody moved. Not Emily, not Karen, not the gallery, not even me for a moment. Because now we had more than a wage dispute, more than damaged property, more than an accusation about a missing watch. We had a dead man on video contradicting his daughter before she ever made her claim. And we had a missing envelope that seemed important enough for Karen to search for it while her father begged her to stop. I asked Emily if she knew where the lockbox was now. Emily shook her head. No, Your Honor, I never opened it. I never went back after Karen fired me. I looked at Karen. Where is the lockbox? Karen's eyes were fixed on the blank screen. Whitmore. She blinked at the house. Where at the house? In my father's room. Did you remove anything from it after his death? No. The word was firm. Too firm. I asked, who had access to the house after Harold died? Karen said, family. Which family? My brother, Daniel. My aunt. A neighbor had a spare key for emergencies. Emily looked surprised at the mention of the neighbor. I asked, name. Karen hesitated. Mr. Lawson. First name. Peter Lawson. I wrote it down. Karen watched my pen move like it was a threat. I asked Emily whether she knew Peter Lawson. She nodded. Harold's neighbor. Retired firefighter. He sometimes checked on Harold when Karen was away. Emily said Harold trusted him. That mattered. Trust forms a map in cases like this. The controlling person wants every road to lead back to them. The vulnerable person quietly builds side roads. A caregiver, a neighbor, a tutor, a child, a letter, a key. Not because they are dramatic, because they are trying to survive being isolated. I asked whether Mr. Lawson was present. Emily looked toward the gallery. An older man in a gray jacket stood slowly. Karen's face twisted with shock. That was one of the most satisfying things about truth in court. It keeps bringing company. Peter Lawson stepped forward. His hands were large, worn, and steady. He did not look eager to speak. That made me trust him more. People eager to insert themselves often bring performance. People reluctant to speak sometimes bring conscience. I asked how he knew Harold. He said they had lived next door to each other for 23 years. Their wives had been friends. After Margaret died, Peter checked on Harold when he could. He said Karen did not like him coming by. Karen stayed silent, barely. I asked if he knew about the lockbox. Peter nodded. Harold told me about it. When? About a month before he passed. Peter looked at Emily, then back at me. He said Karen was after something Margaret left. He said if anything happened and Karen blamed Emily, I should tell the truth. Karen's fingers tightened around her pearl necklace. I asked, what truth? Peter swallowed. That Harold was scared of his daughter. The courtroom went still. Emily wiped her face. Karen looked like she wanted to explode, but remembered the bailiff standing beside her. Peter said Harold had called him one evening after Karen left. His speech was tired, but Peter understood enough. Harold said Karen had been pressuring him to sign papers giving her control over all remaining property. He did not want to. He said Karen kept telling people he was confused whenever he disagreed. That pattern was now unmistakable. When Harold needed care, he was competent enough to remain at home. When Harold defended Emily, he was confused. When Harold protected a family item, he was confused. When Harold remembered his wife's wishes, he was confused. I have no patience for people who weaponize a person's medical history only when it benefits them. I asked Peter if he had seen the lockbox after Harold died. He hesitated. Karen's eyes sharpened. Then Peter reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded paper. I saw carrying it to her car the morning after the funeral. Emily gasped softly. Karen whispered, "You were spying on me." The bailiff turned. Karen stopped. Peter handed over the paper. It was a handwritten note. He said Harold had given it to him weeks earlier, instructing him to write down anything unusual if Karen tried to remove items after his death. The note contained one line in Harold's shaky hand. "Peter, she will say she is protecting family property. She is protecting herself." I looked at Karen. Her face had gone white. I asked Peter what he saw. He said Karen came to Harold's house at 6:40 in the morning, the day after the funeral, before any other family arrived. She entered through the side door and left 20 minutes later carrying a small, dark lockbox and a plastic grocery bag. Peter said he called out to her from his porch. Karen told him, "Family business, Peter. Stay in your lane." The gallery reacted softly. That phrase sounded exactly like Karen. I asked Karen, "Did you remove the lockbox?" She stared at Peter Emmes Whitmore. Her voice was low. "I secured it. Earlier you told me it was in your father's room." She said nothing. "Was that true? Still nothing? Where is it now?" Karen looked down. "In my car." The room shifted. Emily covered her mouth. I asked, "The lockbox is in your car right now?" Karen nodded once. That nod was almost invisible, but everyone saw it. I instructed the bailiff to have the box retrieved according to court procedure. Karen objected with her face, not her mouth. For once, she understood speaking would cost her. While we waited, I asked about the plastic grocery bag. Peter said he could not see inside it, but it appeared to contain papers. Karen shook her head slowly. I asked, "What was in the bag?" She said, "Old mail." "What kind of old mail?" "Family mail." "Where is it?" I threw it out. Emily looked up sharply. Peter closed his eyes. That answer mattered. A lockbox could be opened. A discarded bag of papers might be gone forever. But people like Karen often forget that destruction itself leaves a shape. Missing papers, sudden accusations, changed stories, early morning removals, those are not empty spaces. They are outlines. The bailiff returned with the lockbox. It was small, dark green, with scratches near the latch. Karen watched it like it was alive. I placed Harold's brass key into the lock. For one brief second, it did not turn. Karen inhaled. Then the key clicked. The latch opened. Inside was the gold pocket watch, wrapped in a soft cloth. Emily began crying, not because the watch was valuable, because the accusation had finally been exposed as cruel. I lifted the watch carefully. Beneath it was a photograph of Harold and Margaret on their wedding day, a folded document and a second envelope. Across the envelope, in elegant handwriting, were the words, "For the child who brought laughter back to Harold's kitchen." Emily stared at it. "Sophie," she whispered. Karen closed her eyes. I did not open it yet, not immediately, because Karen's face told me the envelope was dangerous, and because the folded document underneath it had a title that turned a simple civil claim into something far more serious. It read, "Revocation of Prior Authorization." I looked at Karen. She looked back at me with the expression of a woman who had just realized the courtroom was no longer asking whether Emily should be paid. It was asking what Karen had done to keep anyone from finding out Harold had taken her power away. The courtroom no longer felt like a place where a caregiver was asking to be paid. It felt like a room where a dead man had slowly arranged the truth before he left the world. A letter, a key, a watch, a neighbor, a memory card. And now, a document that said Karen Whitmore's authority had been revoked. I held the folded paper in my hand and looked at Karen. She was no longer touching her pearl necklace. Her hands were flat on the table, fingers spread, as if she were trying to hold herself down. That told me something. People grip the table when they are angry. They press their hands flat when they are afraid they might collapse. I unfolded the document at the top. In clean legal language, it identified Harold Whitmore as the principal. It stated that any prior informal authorization given to Karen Whitmore to manage household payments, caregiver scheduling, medication pickup, property access, or financial communication was withdrawn immediately. The date was 3 days before Emily was fired. I read that date twice. Then I looked at Karen. You knew about this document. She did not answer. I continued reading. Harold had signed it. Peter Lawson had witnessed it. Another signature appeared beneath Peter's, Denise Carter, a notary public. Karen stared at the signature like she wanted it to disappear. I asked Peter, "Were you present when this was signed?" "Yes, Your Honor." Was Harold aware of what he was signing? Peter nodded. He was tired, but he understood. He asked for it himself. Karen suddenly spoke, but her voice was smaller now. My father was being influenced. It was not an interruption this time. It was a defense searching for oxygen. I looked at her. By whom? She turned toward Emily. Emily shook her head, tears still on her face. I didn't even know that paper existed, and I believed her, not because she cried, because her shock arrived before her fear. People who already know a secret usually react by managing how much of it shows. Emily reacted like a woman finding out that Harold had been fighting for both of them while she thought she was alone. I asked Peter if Emily knew about the revocation document. He said no. Harold didn't want to put her in the middle. He said Karen would punish her if she knew. That sentence fit the entire case. Karen had punished Emily anyway. I then opened the second envelope. The elegant handwriting belonged to Margaret Whitmore, Harold's late wife. The paper inside was older, folded carefully, with faint perfume still trapped in it, the kind of detail that can make grief feel present. I read silently first, then aloud. My dear Harold, if I am gone before you, and if there is ever a child in this house who makes you laugh again, give her the small silver music box from my dresser, not because of blood, because lonely children should be reminded that tenderness can still find them. Emily began to sob, not loudly, not dramatically. It was the kind of crying that comes when grief finds a door it did not know existed. Her daughter Sophie had lost her father. Harold had lost his wife. And somewhere in that kitchen, between crossword puzzles and soup bowls, an old woman's final wish had found a child she had never met. That was not theft. That was humanity. Karen's face twisted. My mother did not mean that child. I looked at her sharply. She wrote any child. Karen said, she meant family. Then she would have written family. Karen opened her mouth. The bailiff leaned slightly forward. She stopped. The 17th interruption still hung over her like a warning sign. I asked about the silver music box. Karen looked away. Where is it? I asked. She said nothing. I repeated. Where is Margaret's music box? Karen's eyes filled with tears. Finally, something emotional, but again I watched carefully. The tears did not come when Emily spoke about unpaid wages. They did not come when Harold said he was afraid. They did not come when Sophie saved cafeteria snacks because the refrigerator was empty. They came when Karen realized a family object might leave her possession. That told me everything. Peter spoke quietly. She had it in the plastic grocery bag. Karen turned on him. You don't know that. Her voice was sharp, but not loud enough to be an interruption. Peter did not flinch. I saw the blue velvet case through the bag when you put it in the car. Karen looked trapped. I asked, is the music box in your possession? Karen's chin trembled. No. Where is it? She whispered, I sold it. The entire courtroom reacted. Emily covered her mouth. Peter closed his eyes. I felt the air change in a way I have never forgotten. Because now this was no longer about whether Karen had accused Emily falsely. It was about whether Karen had removed property from her father's home, concealed his revoked authority, sold something her mother had specifically left for someone else, and then used a theft accusation to destroy the one person Harold trusted. I asked Karen, when did you sell it? No answer. Before or after you accused Emily of stealing? She swallowed. Before. The word barely came out. I asked, before or after Harold died? Karen's eyes dropped. after Peter looked toward the floor. Emily whispered, "Sophie never even knew." And that sentence was almost unbearable. Sophie never even knew that an elderly man and his late wife had left her something tender. Never knew that inside a house where her mother was being humiliated, someone had seen her grief and wanted to comfort it. Never knew because Karen had turned kindness into cash and then called the caregiver a thief. I asked Karen how much she sold it for. $800. Emily's face went blank. $800? Not even enough to make Karen rich, enough to reveal what she was willing to destroy. I asked where the money went. Karen said, "Household expenses." I looked at the payment records. "You owed Emily $3,800. Karen said nothing. "You sold a music box intended for her daughter and still did not pay her." Karen's eyes flashed. She was not entitled to family property. I said, "And you were not entitled to sell property your father had removed from your control." That was when the bailiff handed me another item from the lockbox, a small folded receipt. It had been tucked under the photograph, almost missed. The receipt was from Porter and Lane Appraisals, not for the pocket watch, for the music box. The date was the day before Harold signed the revocation document. I held it up. Karen stared at it. I asked, "You had the music box appraised before your father revoked your authority?" Karen said nothing. "Then your father revoked your authority 3 days before you fired Emily. Still nothing. And after he died, you removed the lockbox, sold the music box, kept the watch accusation alive, and came into this courtroom accusing Emily of stealing. The silence became enormous. There are moments when a case no longer needs volume. Every fact stands up on its own, and the person who built the lie can only watch it arrange itself. But the most shocking moment had not arrived yet, because inside the lockbox, beneath everything else, was a flash drive, not a memory card, a separate flash drive. It had a small handwritten label wrapped around it. Karen, kitchen, final week. Emily looked confused. Peter looked confused. Karen did not. Her lips parted, and this time no sound came out. I allowed the flash drive to be reviewed and played. The evidence screen lit up again. The angle was different now. It appeared to be from Harold's kitchen camera, pointed toward the table and the back doorway. Emily was not in the room. Harold sat in his wheelchair near the table. Karen stood by the counter, holding a folder. The timestamp showed 5 days before Emily was fired. Karen placed papers in front of Harold. "Sign it." Harold looked at the page. "What is it?" "It confirms Emily was careless with your property." Harold pushed the paper away. "No." Karen's face hardened. "You don't understand what she's doing. She wants money. She wants your things. She brings that child here to make you soft." Harold said, "Sophie is a child." Karen snapped, "Sophie is bait." Emily made a sound like she had been punched. I watched Karen at the defense table. She looked smaller now, but not because she was humbled. Because exposure has a way of shrinking performance. On the screen, Harold said, "Pay Emily." Karen leaned over the table. "If you keep defending her, I will tell everyone she stole the watch. And they will believe me because you forget things." The courtroom froze. That was the sentence that changed everything. Karen had not merely suspected Emily. She had threatened in advance to create the accusation. Harold's voice shook with anger. "I do not forget cruelty." Karen laughed softly. "Yes, Dad, you do." Then she took the paper, tore it in half, and threw it into the trash. Harold looked toward the camera, and for 1 second his eyes met the lens. I have seen many witnesses look into cameras, but Harold looked into that camera like he was looking straight into the future. Then he said, slowly and clearly, "Emily Parker did not steal from me. Karen is lying." The courtroom erupted softly. Not loud chaos, a wave of shock, whispers, breath, disbelief. Emily bent forward, crying into her hands. Peter's jaw tightened. Karen sat frozen. I stopped the video. I looked at Karen. There was no longer any place for her interruptions to hide, no clever phrase, no invented title, no accusation, no claim of confusion, no attack on Emily's character. Her own father had named the lie before it was ever filed in court. I asked Mrs. Whitmore, "Did you threaten to accuse Emily of stealing if your father kept defending her?" Karen's mouth moved, but nothing came out. I asked again. She whispered, "I was under pressure." That answer told me she was done denying. But people like Karen rarely confess because they understand the harm. They confess when denial becomes more dangerous than admission. "What pressure?" I asked. She wiped one tear. "My father was giving everything away." "No, he was protecting what was his." Karen shook her head. "He was embarrassing me. He trusted strangers more than me." Emily looked up, and there it was, the real motive, not money alone, humiliation. Karen could tolerate selling a watch. She could tolerate unpaid wages. She could tolerate an elderly father needing care, but she could not tolerate Harold trusting Emily more than he trusted his own daughter. So she did what controlling people do. She punished the person who became proof of her failure. I asked, "Did Emily steal the watch?" Karen whispered, "No." The courtroom went silent. Emily stared at her. I asked, "Did Emily damage your father's property?" "No." "Did you owe her wages?" Karen looked down. "Yes." "Did you sell Margaret's music box?" "Yes." "Did you intend Sophie Parker to receive it?" Karen's face tightened. "No." That answer was honest, ugly, but honest. I said, "Your mother did." Karen looked away. Then Emily did something no one expected. She stood up, still crying, and said, "Your Honor, I don't care about the music box for money. Sophie lost her father. Harold made her feel safe. I just want Karen to tell my daughter that Harold didn't forget her." That request broke the courtroom. Not because it was legally complex, because it revealed Emily's heart. After months of unpaid work, false accusations, a broken phone, a starving refrigerator, asthma bills, funeral grief, and public humiliation, she was not asking first for revenge. She was asking for a child to be told she had mattered. Karen looked at Emily as if she could not understand that kind of request. And perhaps she could not. I turned to Karen. Ems Whitmore, stand. She stood slowly. No interruptions now, no corrections, no performance. I said, "You came into this courtroom accusing a working widow of theft. You interrupted this court 17 times to keep evidence from being heard. You used your father's illness as a weapon against his credibility. You withheld wages from a caregiver who bought your father's medication. You sold an item your mother intended for a grieving child. And you did it all while calling yourself the protector of your family." Karen's face crumbled. But I was not finished, because justice is not only naming what happened. Justice is making sure the lie cannot keep living after the hearing ends. I reached for the final page from Harold's lockbox. It was a handwritten note, short, only 2 lines, but when I read it, even Karen covered her mouth. It said, "Emily, if my voice is gone, use the truth as mine. Tell Sophie she made an old man less lonely." Emily broke down completely, and for the first time all day, Karen Whitmore did not interrupt. She could not. Because Harold had just spoken from beyond the grave, and every person in that courtroom knew exactly who had tried to silence him. That note changed the courtroom in a way money never could. Emily Parker stood there with both hands pressed against her mouth, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Peter Lawson lowered his head. Even the bailiff, who had spent the entire case watching Karen Whitmore like a storm that might break loose at any second, stood still. And Karen looked smaller than she had at any point that day. Not humble, not fully sorry, just exposed. There is a difference. Humility comes when a person understands the damage they caused. Exposure comes when the room finally understands it for them. Karen Whitmore had not reached humility yet, but she had lost the performance. And for someone like her, that was the first real punishment. I looked at Emily Parker. "Sit down for a moment." She nodded, but she moved like her knees might give out. She sat slowly, holding Harold's note with the kind of care people usually reserve for photographs of the dead. I understood why. Harold had not only defended her, he had seen her daughter. He had seen Sophie's grief, her asthma, her quiet fear, her small attempts to smile again after losing her father. And he had left proof that kindness had happened in that kitchen. Karen could not sell that. She could not interrupt that. She could not rename that as theft. I turned to Karen Ems Whitmore. "You have admitted that Emily did not steal the watch." Karen stared down. "Yes." "You admitted you owed her wages." "Yes." "You admitted you sold the music box." Her mouth tightened. "Yes." "And you admitted you had no intention of honoring your mother's written wish." Karen lifted her eyes, and for one brief moment anger returned. "My mother's wish was sentimental. It wasn't legal." That sentence was almost a relief, because it showed the courtroom who Karen still was beneath the tears. Some people cry and change. Some people cry and look for a loophole. I said, "Your mother's wish may be a separate property issue, but your conduct in this courtroom is not separate from this claim. You falsely accused Emily Parker of theft to avoid paying her. You used that accusation to damage her reputation. You withheld wages you knew were owed. You allowed her to purchase your father's medication and did not reimburse her. You caused damage to her phone during a dispute about documentation. And then you walked into this court and interrupted 17 times because silence was dangerous to you." Karen said nothing. Finally, I reviewed Emily's documents one more time. Her time logs matched Karen's text messages. Her pharmacy receipts matched Karen's requests. Her broken phone estimate was reasonable. The wage amount was supported. The reimbursement claims were supported. The accusation of theft was not only unsupported, it had been destroyed by Harold's letter, the lockbox, the watch, Peter Lawson's testimony, and Karen's own admissions. I issued judgment for Emily, unpaid wages, medication reimbursements, bond repair, emergency expenses directly connected to Karen's delayed payment, court costs, and additional damages allowed under the claim for the harm caused by Karen's false accusation and withholding of earned pay. When I announced the total, Karen flinched, not because she could not pay it, because paying Emily meant losing the final argument she had left control. I also ordered Karen to provide a written correction to anyone she had told that Emily stole from Harold, family members, neighbors, any agency, any private employer, any person Karen had contacted with that accusation. Karen looked up sharply. "I never," she stopped herself. The bailiff watched her. That almost interruption was the last ghost of the woman who had walked in. I said, "Do not finish that sentence unless it is true." Karen closed her mouth. I continued. "The lockbox and the watch will not leave this courtroom in your possession today. The relevant documents and video material will be copied and preserved because this case raises issues beyond a civil wage dispute, including potential elder exploitation, conversion of property, destruction or concealment of estate documents, and false accusations made to avoid payment. I am referring the matter to the appropriate authorities for review." Karen's face went pale again. Emily looked stunned. I said, "That does not mean this court is deciding criminal liability. It means the evidence will not be buried because you interrupted loudly enough." That was important. People needed to hear it. Court is not magic. It does not undo death. It does not bring back Margaret's music box. It does not erase months of anxiety from Emily's daughter or give Harold more time. But it can stop a lie from continuing to benefit the liar. And sometimes that is where justice begins. Then I addressed the music box. Karen had sold it. She claimed she no longer had it. But Peter had identified the blue velvet case. The appraisal receipt tied Karen to the item. Harold's lockbox tied the envelope to Margaret's written wish. Whether another court would ultimately decide the property issue was not for that moment, but the civil harm Karen had caused was clear. I ordered Karen to disclose the buyer's information and preserve all records of the sale. She looked as if she wanted to object. She did not. I also ordered restitution in the amount Karen received for the sale, separate from Emily's wages and expenses, pending further review of the property claim. And I made it clear that if Karen lied about the buyer, sold it through a private cash transaction, or attempted to hide the record, she would be handing authorities another thread to pull. Karen's shoulders sank, not dramatically. Just enough, for the first time, the weight of her own conduct seemed to press against her. Then Emily stood again. "Your Honor?" I looked at her. She held Harold's note carefully. "Can I tell Sophie what he wrote?" That question hurt more than it should have, because Emily was still asking permission to receive kindness after a woman like Karen had spent months treating kindness like theft. I said, "Miss Parker, that note was written to you, and the words about Sophie were meant for Sophie." Emily nodded, crying again. Karen looked away. I turned to Karen one last time. "Ems Whitmore, you are going to listen to me without interrupting." She nodded. "Your father was not confused when he defended Emily. He was not confused when he protected his watch. He was not confused when he revoked your authority. He was not confused when he said your mother wanted a lonely child to have something gentle. The only confusion in this case was the one you tried to manufacture." Karen's eyes filled again, but I kept going. "You mistook your father's weakness for permission. You mistook Emily's financial struggle for powerlessness. You mistook Sophie's grief for something you could dismiss because she was not blood. And you mistook this courtroom for another room where you could talk until everyone gave up." I leaned forward. But evidence does not get tired. The courtroom stayed silent. Truth does not lose patience. Emily wiped her face, and the law does not care how many times you interrupt it. Karen lowered her head. That was the first moment she looked almost human, not redeemed, just defeated by something larger than her voice. I then spoke directly to Emily. "Ems Parker, you came here asking to be paid for work you performed. You brought records, you brought receipts, you brought the words of a man who trusted you. You did not steal from Harold Whitmore. You cared for him. And when he was afraid his truth would disappear, he trusted you to carry it." Emily began crying again, but this time her tears looked different, less like fear, more like release. Peter Lawson stepped forward before leaving the witness area and asked permission to say one thing. I allowed it. He turned toward Emily and said, "Harold used to say Sophie made the house sound alive again." Emily broke down completely. There are sentences a person does not forget. That was one of them. Karen heard it too. And perhaps somewhere beneath her anger and entitlement, she understood the thing she had truly sold was not a music box. It was the last generous act her mother and father had tried to leave behind. As the case ended, Karen did not storm out. She did not point. She did not interrupt. She gathered her folder slowly, but it looked useless now. A slim folder full of accusations could not compete with a lockbox full of truth. Emily stayed seated for a moment after judgment. She held Harold's note in one hand and the photograph of Sophie at the kitchen table in the other. I watched her look at that photograph like she was memorizing proof that the hardest months of her life had not only contained cruelty, they had contained love too. That matters. People think justice is only about punishment. It is not. Sometimes justice is a check that pays the rent. Sometimes it is a corrected lie. Sometimes it is a witness who finally speaks. Sometimes it is a dead man's handwriting telling a grieving little girl that she brought laughter back into a quiet house. And sometimes justice is simply this: A woman who was talked over 17 times finally gets heard once. As Karen reached the courtroom doors, she stopped and looked back. For a second, I thought she might apologize. Emily thought so too. You could see it in her face, but Karen only said, "I didn't think it would go this far." That was the closest she came to confession. I answered, "That is because you thought the truth depended on your permission." She left without another word. Emily did not chase her. She did not need to. The lie was over. Later, I thought about Harold sitting in that bedroom chair, looking into the camera with a body that was failing but a mind still fighting. I thought about Margaret's letter, written before she ever knew Sophie existed. I thought about a child saving cafeteria snacks because she was afraid her mother would not be paid. I thought about Emily's cracked shoes, worn down by work, Karen tried to dismiss as nothing. And I thought about Karen's 17 interruptions. Every one of them had the same purpose: stop the sentence, stop the witness, stop the memory, stop the dead man's voice. Stop the caregiver from becoming credible, stop the courtroom from reaching the lockbox. But interruption is not truth. It is fear making noise. And that day, noise lost, because in my courtroom, the loudest person does not win. The person with the truth does.